The flight from Boston to Dallas turned into a nightmare when little Ethan Hayes, the 4-month-old son of tech billionaire Richard Hayes, started screaming uncontrollably at 35,000 feet. Richard, the 38-year-old CEO of one of Silicon Valley's most important companies, was completely helpless before the inconsolable sobs of his baby. The flight attendants took turns trying to calm him. First-class passengers cast looks of disapproval, and Richard was sweating cold in his $6,000 suit, feeling like the worst father in the world. After 2 hours of nonstop crying, when it seemed like nothing could stop the baby's torment, a soft voice rose from the economy section. It was Sarah Miller, a 26-year-old single mother with a 5-year-old daughter in her arms, traveling on an economy ticket purchased with great effort. She had no money, no husband, but she had something that all of Richard's millions couldn't buy: the maternal instinct born of desperation. What happened in the following minutes would change both their lives forever, proving that sometimes love is not measured in numbers, but in gestures that cost everything and ask for nothing in return. The private jet was in maintenance, forcing Richard to take a commercial flight for the first time in years. Sitting in first class with little Ethan, the billionaire already felt completely out of place. His wife Jennifer had died during childbirth due to unforeseen complications, leaving him alone with a newborn who seemed to cry every time he picked him up. Ethan had started crying even before the Boston takeoff, and now, half an hour into flight, his desperate scream filled the entire cabin. Richard had tried everything the nannies had taught him: the bottle, the diaper change, the pacifier, lullabies whispered in a trembling voice. Nothing worked. The looks from the other first-class passengers pierced him like daggers. Businessmen like him showed ill-disguised irritation and condescending pity. The flight attendants alternated attempt to help, but Ethan rejected every attempt at consolation, as if sensing his father's insecurity and rejecting it along with him. Richard stood up and began walking awkwardly down the narrow aisle, rocking the baby. His face, always controlled in multi-million-dollar meetings, now sweated pure anxiety. It wasn't just Ethan's cries that devastated him, but the terrifying realization that he couldn't give his own son what he needed. Sarah Miller, from the economy section, watched the scene with a broken heart. She had recognized Richard from business newspapers, the young man who had lost his wife during childbirth, but she only saw a desperate father deal with a pain beyond his competence. Sarah was traveling with her daughter Lily, who was miraculously asleep despite the commotion. They had paid for these tickets with their last savings to get to Dallas, where she hoped to find work as a pediatric nurse after her husband abandoned her for his secretary. Ethan's cry was not just noise. It was a primal scream of pain that every mother instinctively recognizes. Sarah saw that Richard tried everything mechanically, following instructions instead of listening to the baby. Ethan was communicating something his father couldn't decipher. After 2 hours of agony, when even the crew seemed to have lost hope, Sarah couldn't stay quiet any longer. She got up and approached the curtain separating the classes, being politely stopped by a flight attendant who explained the access rules. Richard saw her through the separation and recognized something in her gaze that he had never seen in the expensive nannies he had hired. Not pity, not judgment, but authentic understanding. Sarah met his eyes and simply said, "Can I try?" She wasn't asking for money or favors. She was offering the only thing she truly possessed: the experience of a mother who had spent sleepless nights deciphering her daughter's cries, who had learned to distinguish every nuance of need behind a child's tears. Richard watched her for a long moment. The pride of the man accustomed to controlling everything clashed with the paternal love that pushed him to try anything. Desperation won, and he signaled for flight attendants to let Sarah pass. Sarah approached with calm, confident movements, unfazed by the volume of the crying or the intimidating elegance of first class. When Richard handed her Ethan, their hands briefly touched. He trembled with anxiety. She radiated a quiet confidence born of experience. As soon as Ethan was in Sarah's arms, something in the atmosphere changed. She didn't start with frantic attempt to calm him, but simply held him against her chest, letting him cry while transmitting a different, more stable presence. She began rocking him with a natural rhythm that came from her body center, fluid like ocean waves. At the same time, she softly sang an old Spanish lullaby that her mother used to sing to her, not the foreign melodies the nannies had suggested, but something that seemed to emerge directly from the soul. Ethan didn't stop crying immediately, but the tone changed. The desperate sobs gradually transformed into a softer whimper, as if he was finally finding someone who spoke his emotional language. Richard watched every movement, as if witnessing a miracle. It wasn't just technique, but something deeper. Sarah was transmitting a security to Ethan that he couldn't offer, despite all the love he felt. The passengers, who had previously shown irritation, now watched with growing curiosity until the crew drew near. They were witnesses to a transformation that went beyond the simple ability to calm a baby. Slowly, very slowly, Ethan stopped crying completely, his blue eyes fixed on Sarah with curiosity. The small hands that had been clenched for hours relaxed. A blessed silence finally enveloped the cabin, but Sarah didn't stop. She continued rocking and singing, as if instinctively knowing Ethan needed to feel completely safe before he could sleep. Richard understood that his late wife Jennifer had had the same gift, one that asked for nothing in return. Ethan fell into a deep sleep, his face relaxed for the first time in weeks. Richard looked at Sarah with a gratitude that went beyond words, realizing this woman had achieved in 20 minutes what he couldn't do in months. The rest of the flight proceeded peacefully. Richard watched Sarah hold his son as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time since Jennifer died, he felt less alone in the challenge of being a father. As the plane began its descent to Dallas, Richard knew he couldn't just thank this woman and let her disappear from their lives. Ethan needed her, and perhaps he did too. The landing was the calmest Richard had experienced with Ethan. The baby woke only when the plane touched the ground, and instead of crying, he looked around with serene curiosity, as if seeing the world with new eyes. Sarah gently handed Ethan back to Richard, and this time the baby didn't protest. He seemed to have recognized a different calmness in his father, acquired by watching her interact with him. In the Dallas arrivals area, Richard found himself in unknown territory. He was used to negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, but he didn't know how to ask a stranger to revolutionize his life. He had seen Sarah with her daughter Lily, a beautiful 5-year-old girl, who looked at Ethan with sweet curiosity. Sarah explained she was a pediatric nurse looking for work in Dallas, temporarily staying in a modest boarding house with her last savings. Richard could read between the lines, the precarious situation, but also the dignity with which she faced her difficulties. The proposal Richard made was as crazy as it was necessary, to work for him as Ethan's nanny, with a generous salary, a furnished apartment, and everything she and Lily would need. It wasn't just a job, but a possibility for both of them to give their children what they couldn't offer alone. Sarah looked alternately at Lily, Ethan, and Richard. She saw a man desperately in love with his son, but unable to communicate with him. A baby who needed care beyond luxury, and her daughter, who deserved stability and opportunities. Lily curiously approached Ethan and gently touched his little hand. The baby, instead of crying, seemed intrigued by the older girl. It was as if even he knew this connection could become something special. After long moments of reflection, Sarah accepted with one condition: 1 month on a trial basis. If the situation didn't work out for anyone, it would end there with no hard feelings. Richard accepted immediately, though he already knew 1 month would never be enough. As they left the airport together, he with Ethan, she with Lily, their bags loaded by the driver, both felt they were starting something that would change their lives in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The trial month quietly turned into an indefinite period, and neither of them spoke of deadlines or contract again. They were building something together that went beyond any employment agreement. Richard's estate in the suburbs of Dallas was a masterpiece of design that had never heard the sound of children's laughter. When Sarah and Lily first entered, the house felt more like a museum than a family home. Everything perfect, elegant, and completely unsuitable for a newborn and a 5-year-old girl. Lily immediately explored the garden with wide eyes, exclaiming it was like a fairy tale palace. Sarah observed every room with admiration mixed with anxiety, wondering how a girl raised in a working-class neighborhood of New Orleans could feel a home in such a mansion. The first weeks were a delicate period of adjustment. Ethan continued to be difficult, but with Sarah, he showed a serenity Richard had never seen. She established precise routines: regular feeding, relaxing baths, long walks in the garden, where the baby could hear natural sounds instead of the house's sterile silence. Richard observed Sarah's every gesture with obsessive attention, taking mental notes on how she held Ethan during feeding, how she interpreted his different types of cries, how the same lullaby seemed to have magical effects on the baby. One evening, finding Sarah rocking Ethan and softly singing, Richard timidly asked if he could stay. She smiled and pointed to the chair beside her, beginning a conversation that would open both their hearts. Richard talked about Jennifer, the loneliness, the constant fear of not measuring up as a father. Sarah shared her difficult childhood, the failed marriage, the determination to give Lily better opportunities. In the following days, Richard began spending more time at home. He rescheduled meetings, delegated responsibilities, transforming his offices into home offices where he would work while always listening to the sounds of the family unconsciously forming. Lily adapted to the mansion as if it had always been her home, turning the garden into her kingdom and talking to Ethan as if he could understand her perfectly, with the typical confidence of children. She began calling him her little brother. The most evident transformation was in Richard himself. The former workaholic now rushed home for Ethan's bath time. He participated in family dinners, learning to distinguish between different types of cries. One night, Richard found Sarah and Lily in the kitchen, preparing gumbo the way Sarah's grandmother taught. Lily, covered in flour but overjoyed, insisted Richard join them, but only after removing his elegant blazer, because gumbo is messy work. That night, eating homemade gumbo around the kitchen table instead of the formal dining room, Richard realized the trial month was ending. He couldn't imagine a mansion without Lily's laughter, without Sarah's lullabies, without a serene and happy Ethan. But there was something deeper he didn't dare admit. He was falling in love with Sarah, not the romantic idea of her, but the real, strong, gentle woman who had turned his house into a home and his son into a happy baby. On the terrace that night, both with cups of tea and a comfortable silence between them, Richard asked if she wanted to stay beyond the trial month. Sarah's answer was simple. Ethan needed stability. Lily had grown attached. This place had become their home. When Richard asked what she needed personally, Sarah admitted honestly that she didn't know. Everything had become complicated. The boundaries between work and feelings increasingly blurred. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't confess. But both knew something had changed. They were building something together that went beyond the initial agreement, a possibility of love neither had sought, but both were learning to desire. 3 months after the encounter on the plane, the mansion pulsed with a life it had never known. The hallways echoed with Lily's laughter, chasing Ethan, now a 6-month-old baby crawling everywhere with unstoppable curiosity. The walls had been covered with Lily's drawings and photos of daily moments documenting the growing family. Richard had become a completely different man. The former workaholic now rushed home for bath time, participated in Lily's games, and had learned to recognize every nuance in Ethan's crying. Sarah had transformed not just the house, but him. One October evening, while they were raking fallen leaves in the garden together, Richard finally found the courage to say what he had been feeling for weeks. The confession came out simple and direct. He was in love with her. He didn't know exactly when it happened, but he couldn't keep pretending it was just gratitude. Sarah confessed to feeling the same, but stressed how complicated the situation was. Richard was her boss. Lily had started seeing him as a father figure. Ethan loved them both. If things didn't work out, the children would suffer. Richard gently took her hands, promising they could take all the time necessary. Nothing would change in their work agreement or the life they had built for the children. It would just be a possible future to explore together, without pressure. The first kiss was sweet and uncertain, full of the tenderness of two people who found each other when they least expected it. It wasn't dramatic, but it tasted of home, of security, of promise. Lily appeared at the living room window, her nose pressed against the glass, excitedly shouting that Mommy and Daddy were hugging. Her innocent observation made them both laugh, breaking the tension with the instinctive wisdom of a child who had already understood what the adults were still defining. That night, putting the children to bed together, for the first time as something more than housemates, both knew they were starting a new chapter. It wouldn't be easy to balance love and responsibility, but for the first time in a long time, both believed the future could be bright. Ethan fell asleep smiling, as if he too sensed he finally had a complete family. 2 years after that first kiss in the autumn garden, the mansion was preparing for a special celebration. The day they would officially become a family in the eyes of the law. Ethan, now 2.5, ran around the house with 5-year-old Lily, who had completely taken on the role of protective older sister. The baby who once cried inconsolably had become serene and smiling, calling Sarah Mommy with the same naturalness he called Richard Daddy. Lily had developed special bonds with both adoptive parents. With Richard, she shared a passion for puzzles and building. With Sarah, the love for cooking and bedtime stories. But above all, she had found in Ethan the little brother she had always dreamed of. The path to that moment hadn't always been simple. There have been arguments, moments of doubt, the difficulty of balancing different roles, but also moments of pure joy. Ethan calling Sarah Mommy for the first time, Lily declaring she had the strongest daddy in the world. Sunday mornings all in bed reading stories. On the day of the official adoptions hearing, the Hayes family presented itself united. The judge, impressed by the naturalness of their relationships, commented that she rarely saw families so united by heart before law. Lily, interviewed separately, explained with the confidence of a 5-year-old that having Richard as her legal daddy meant he can never leave, and I can tell everyone I have a daddy who really loves me. Ethan, too young to understand procedure, spontaneously approached Sarah during the hearing, communicated with gestures what words couldn't express. The celebration at home involved friends turned extended family, parents from Lily's school, colleagues of Richard who had witnessed his transformation, and doctors who accompanied Ethan in his difficult first months. But the most beautiful moment came at night, when the children were in bed and Richard and Sarah found themselves in the garden where everything began. They reflected on how they had changed. He, from a desperate man on a plane to a devoted father and loving husband. She, from a single mother with no prospects to a woman with solid family and a bright future. Ethan started crying over the monitor, but this time neither of them was alarmed. They went up together. Sarah calmed him with her usual lullaby, while Richard straightened the covers. Lily woke up and climbed into the bed, as she did when she felt the family gathered. The 4 of them slept together in a pile of intertwined arms and legs that was anything but elegant, but everything perfect. The next morning, Richard woke first and looked at his sleeping wife and children around him. Ethan sucked his thumb against Sarah's chest. Lily had an arm around her father's neck and squeezed her little brother's hand. It was the most beautiful family portrait he had ever seen, born from a desperate cry on a plane and grown through daily gestures of unconditional love. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as extraordinary events, Richard thought. They arrive as brave women who leave their seats to calm a stranger's baby. They grow through domestic scenes and whispered lullabies. They are completed in families that fate assembles carefully, one heart at a time. The Hayes family was living proof that love knows no boundaries of blood, social class, or circumstance. It only knows the capacity to open one's heart when the right person arrives at the right time. Even if that moment is at 35,000 feet in the middle of a desperate baby's cry who needed exactly what an unknown mother could give. Sometimes miracles don't come in grand events. They come in gestures of kindness from a stranger who decides to soothe a billionaire's baby. The Hayes family is living proof that true love knows no boundaries of blood or social class. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, hit the like button and share to honor all the mothers who comfort children who aren't their own. And tell me in the comments, what city or country are you listening to this story from? I'm going to read every comment.